I want to thank you guys again for some time, and I've really enjoyed just hearing everyone's testimonies. It's always uplifting and just exciting to be a part of these things. So I will confess, it is hard. I know last week we got to visually see and engage with the speakers. And so this is very different today. But also I will confess my wife is in education, and one of the things that she's enjoyed playing around with is Bitmoji, which I know nothing about, but she created one for me. So we're just going to put that out there and see if that helps a little bit, makes you feel like you're a little bit more connected. I think she did make me seem or appear a little younger than I really look right now, which is very kind of her. So again, yes, my name is Fernando, and I'm going to be sharing about counting the cost and the blessings with you guys today, which actually I've been tracking some of the questions that you guys have been sharing. And as I followed along, I thought, you know what, maybe hopefully some of the things I share with you guys will kind of address some of those questions. Now, to get started, the juxtaposition of cost and blessings is stark and a powerful element of our lives and our faith. It is consistently displayed across Scripture. If you guys think about the story of Job, of David's life, of Jeremiah, of Paul, you're constantly hearing the suffering and the cost that they had to bear in their lives. And it's also put right across, right next to, we also see the blessings and the joy that they would experience. So I want to be able to share a little bit about my own testimony and how the Lord has allowed me to wrestle with that, what the cost and the blessings are in serving overseas. So with that, I thought about this question as I really typed these things up and wrote it out. And it's interesting that what are the costs and where are the blessings tends to be the thing that kind of the way the statement is pronounced. And I like to pay attention to little words and statements, because what are the cost means for us that we're looking very specifically what the cost is going to be so that we can measure it and we can decide whether it's a valued or worthwhile investment. We like to pay attention to the cost and see if we can get the most bang for our buck in whatever we do. That's kind of that mindset that a lot of us have. And then the other element is, where are the blessings? Meaning we're always in search for them. We're waiting for them. We're like, okay, where's the good things? Where's the blessings coming from? And part of me wrestles with that and tries to actually reverse it, where I say, where are the costs? Where are these costs? And, am I really noticing them? Are they really impacting me? Are they what I thought they were going to be? And then what are the blessings? What are the blessings that God is really showing and providing and giving me in my life right now? So I just kind of played with that and see if it makes sense a little bit more. So this is an image of kind of what my wife and I saw when we first moved overseas back in 2008. This was kind of what our backyard really looked like as we packed up. After being married for a few years, decided, we prepared, we got ready, we trained as much as we could. We had thought about it for a long time, and we're like, we're going to go serve overseas. We want to be where there's not that many people serving. And, it just so happens that the Lord really drove us to a place that looks kind of like this. And what really was that it raised a lot of questions for us when we arrived. Part of that was that it was a barren land. And what that means is it literally looked like this, but also it was this spiritually. We really struggled with landing in a place and realizing, our expectations of serving, of making the gospel known, of sharing our faith are quite limited. And there's also a lot of concerns that we didn't account for. So that took some time and some things to wrestle with, as far as, what are the costs that we have to go through right now? And where are these blessings where we packed everything up, we've moved, and we decided to start a new life for you, God? How are you going to use this and bless this? Well, it turns out the land was actually quite barren, a lot of struggles. And one of the things that we realized was when we went as tent makers. We went with a job. And what we learned very quickly, and what we were even encouraged by some very wise leaders, were focus on your job, do your job well, and then see what God does. And, I think it's John Calvin also noted that no task will be so sordid and base, provide you obey your calling in it. So it really had nothing to do with what our job was, whether we were running a Fortune 500 company or we were teaching students basic grammar of English. It didn't really matter as long as we were really trying to do it well. And that's what we focused on. It took years of what felt like very little rain and very little change in the soil that we were tilling. And we really struggled in that as far as ministry goes. And actually, it's about the 5th, 6th, and 7th year that we really experienced a fruitful ministry. And if I could just paint a quick picture for you guys, when we first arrived, there was very little opportunity to share about Jesus, very limited ability even in ourselves because of language barriers, and lots of concerns as far as what we can say and how we could say things and what would lead to certain repercussions. And that was the first few years of our life there. But what we noticed was gradually, as we worked hard and did well in our careers and our jobs there, the Lord opened new doors. And I would share one amazing thing is that, just to paint you a picture of what a drastic change we got to witness and we were blessed with, was in the beginning, we could never even talk about our faith, only in very rare occasions. We were even careful, even in our own home, to mention our faith because we never knew who was listening. And there was very little talk about the Bible, very little talk about what it meant to follow Jesus, very few open doors. But after many, many years, we saw a significant change. And what we experienced, if you guys can see this image, is the Lord kind of gave us our own little area where he started really blessing. And what is fascinating is at our final year of working as teachers in an education field, I was actually brought into an office where I thought there was going to be some concerns addressed with me by deans and leaders in this university. And I was a little worried and prayerful, thinking there was going to be repercussions I had to face. And instead, I was invited and I was asked to teach, to literally take on a whole new course where I got to teach the Bible and all that it entailed to over 100 students, over a new graduating class. They asked me, could you please just take this semester and just focus on what it means to understand the Bible? It was mind-blowing. It was something that we couldn't fathom that would ever take place where we were. And that happened in our seventh, eighth year of ministry. And that was a great gift that we still celebrate today, where the first few years we were on guard and treading very carefully to have conversations. And in the last year, I was given an open door and just actually encouraged by very important people of power requesting me to share what it meant to know and to follow Jesus. Now, with that, We would think that counting the cost sometimes is in the beginning, but actually for my story, counting the cost was at the end. Because what happens when we feel and we get to experience this fertile land and ministry is actually going quite well. What was interesting was as we celebrated, we actually were being called and kind of led by the Spirit to let go. So what was really just a unique experience for my wife and my children and I was when things were actually really good and ministry life was going well and our family was finally adjusting to being parents of 2 young children, to having stability, to having good rhythm in our lives, to seeing fruitful ministry. The Lord calls us to go and we move on. So there again, we wrestled with what are the costs and where are these blessings? And what is the Lord calling us to? Which I think brings us to this next thing, which many of you might still struggle with even at this time. I know in this conference, we've really been looking at how do we take our work and use it abroad and use it in that global missions context. But for some of us, you might actually experience what I went through, where we experience a transition, where you take this leap of faith in shifting careers. If some of you have recognized, this is a famous image from a movie, an old movie of Indiana Jones. If you've never seen it, you should. It's one of the great movies of my time. And what it does in this scene is there's really this bridge that he has to take this step and leap of faith and walk across, but he really can't see it and really doesn't know what's going to happen when he takes it. And that's kind of what was my experience and my wife's as we transitioned off the field and left Asia and came back to the US. So with that, I want to briefly talk about my dreams and aspirations. I noticed last week, many people talked about, hey, this is what I'm really passionate about. And they asked questions, how do I really incorporate what I'm driven at and use it for the Lord? You know, one of the things I struggled with were wrestling with my own dreams and my own aspirations. I confess I had hoped to go back to graduate studies and pursue a PhD. I loved teaching history. I loved lecturing. I loved being in the university arena and just working with students. And I really felt like the Lord gifted me in that area and I'd hoped to stay in that area. But what happened was at the same time, there was this quiet voice that kept hinting at a different calling and at different things. And what it led to was really assessing the needs versus the wants. And during my time working overseas, I realized that every year there was a gradual increase where people were not coming to discuss academics or discuss history with me, but a lot of people were bringing serious problems that they were wrestling with. I remember my wife and I first struggling with the student ending up at our door almost near midnight, contemplating suicide and spending the next 2 or 3 hours talking to her and bringing her back to a place of stability. I remember over the next 6 months and the next year, several students coming and sharing these deep spiritual and emotional battles they would face. And I also, over the years, as they progressed, more and more friends and colleagues, people I worked with, and just around my environment, even other fellow tent makers would come and share their struggles. And I realized there were needs that the Lord was bringing to the table that needed to be addressed. So what happened was weighing the cost at the brink of 40. Some of you might be in your 20s and your 30s right now, and careers are just getting started. Well, for ourselves, we thought that we were settled in. We could see ourselves staying another 5 or 10 years working there, doing quite well. The university that we taught at had actually moved and was requesting and was asking if I wanted a longer contract. Instead of wrestling or dealing with a 1-year visa and contract, they were offering me 3 to 5 years. And opportunities were knocking at my door. But then we had to weigh the cost. Do we go back? Do I change careers? Do I study something else? And how do I do that at the age of 40 with 2 kids and really nothing to go back to the US? We prayed a lot. We prepared. We met with several people for counsel. And as we weighed the costs, we also looked towards the blessings that he would provide. And the Lord was always faithful. How we count those blessings is quite unique because I have transitioned now, as Pastor David has shared, where now, instead of lecturing, I listen. Now, instead of having huge classrooms filled with 50, 60, 100 people, or 300 people in a lecture hall, now I have 1 to 2. And now I listen very carefully. And the blessings that have come from this transition, well, we just don't have the time for me to share them all. But it is something that the Lord has done and that we're very, very grateful for. And lastly, I want to share how we wrestled with this, how we brought this transition into being in our own lives. One of the things that remains at the core of all of these experiences is something I enjoy, that I look at when I go back to Paul's letters. I ask myself, what was the reason? What was the reason I went? What was the reason I came back? What is the reason that I'm doing these things? And a lot of us we're questioning and we're asking ourselves whether it's for our careers or our families, finances, different elements to consider, different costs to weigh. But I recall Paul's words where he says, he repeats 3 times in the book of Ephesians. He starts off, for this reason, and he starts to share why he does certain things. So with that, I want to encourage us that one can only accurately count the cost or the blessings if they are clear in their purpose. It's actually become very wasteful for me to worry about the cost or look for the blessings if I don't really know what the end goal is, if I forget what the purpose of all of this is. But when I realign myself and I remember why I do what I do, then I really start noticing the costs have been very few. The blessings have been overwhelming. One of the things that I've noticed, and I saw last week in the board, many people brought this up. Some of us are extremely passionate. You might be extremely passionate about coding or marketing or several other, whatever your profession has called you to, science and technology, building and just creation. But one of the things that I'm reminded of is that before creation, pre-creation, the Trinity existed. Our God existed. And he existed in relation to himself in the triune God. So pre-creation, we still see this relational component. And what that does for me is it makes me realize that everything I do is about relationships. And that's something that I've always tried to keep myself aligned to, because it's very easy to be distracted by something and forget that there is someone there. So the relational lens of God intent making has been very significant in my life, because it's not about just what my job is, but it's about what the relationship is to the people in that place, in whatever place that God calls me to. Remembering the because is what keeps me going. And you know, when I became a believer at around 21 or 22, the first book of the Bible I decided to read on my own as a believer, just by opening the Bible and actually finding one that seemed pretty short and easy to get through, was the book of Philippians. And as I read that on my own with very little knowledge and insight about who God was, I was struck by Philippians chapter 3. And it has always remained one of the cornerstones of my faith and just my walk with the Lord. And I just recall, and I just want to read that out for us, as Paul says in verse 8, "Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord." And it is that because that I'm able to count the costs, count the losses that maybe we have endured. You know, coming back at the age of 40 and realizing all of your friends have bought their homes, have stable careers, have settled into the great American life. Some have even bought their second homes. And then for us, realizing, what are we doing? How are we going to start over? But it is because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus that I do what I do. Lastly, I want to end with, recently I was reading, as I move into this new field of mental health and providing therapy, I love what Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminds me of. You know, he says, the most experienced psychologist or observer of human nature knows infinitely less of the human heart than the simplest Christian who lives beneath the cross of Jesus. But I want to take this home one step more with you all and whatever career you are in. And I'm glad the question was brought up in that last panel. The greatest psychological insight, ability, and experience cannot grasp this one thing, what sin is. And I want you guys to think about, you know, the greatest insight that you have in your career as a coder, as a marketplace analyst, or as a business, creating new businesses and ventures, and just whatever it is that the Lord has gifted you in, and whatever place you are in, that still is only a small part of who you are as a believer. But our insight and our ability and our experience of understanding what sin is and how it impacts people's lives, like the people that you work with every day, like the people that sit across from you or are in meetings with you over Zoom, when you can understand how sin works and how gospel brings freedom and everlasting change, that is something that will continually impact every aspect of the global market and the world. I thank you guys for your time and for allowing me to share today. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Pastor David.